What if you could guarantee that tomorrow would be better than today? That the work you're doing will have an impact, not just in this moment or in this year, but a true and lasting legacy of positive change? What if you had the ability to inspire those around you to make the world a better place? To right the wrongs, to address injustice, and to celebrate and amplify the good that happens every day. There are millions of people who want to be part of change, but just haven't been asked. They're out there. We're sure of it. How does it feel to make a gift that changes the world? Well, magical. We're building technology to help donors support the organizations that they love the most. Whether you give a little or you give a lot, your impact is felt. And together, we can make tomorrow better than today. We're version 2, and we're reinventing technology that reimagines what's possible in fundraising.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Alumless. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Today is Friday, May 22nd, 2026. This is the Traditions and Change at Historic Institutions edition. I'm Ryan Catherwood, and I am joined by CMAC founder and CEO, Chris Marshall. What's going on, sir? It's good to see you.
Good to see you, Ryan. How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's overcast. It's kind of an ugly day here in Virginia, but we needed the rain desperately. It's been a very dry spring so far, but
we're coming off a really bad heat now into rain here in Pennsylvania. But the best part about my long weekend coming up is that my daughter and my granddaughter are coming to visit for the weekend. So I'll get to spend 3 days chasing a 1.5-year-old around my house, which will be fun.
That's awesome. It's hard for me to sometimes think of you as a grandpa, but indeed,
I'm an old man.
You got some big kids and some little kids and some grandkids, all sorts of Marshall kids running around, huh?
I'll be turning 60 next month, man. I'm old.
Well, you don't look a day over 35.
Right.
On the show, we talk about alumni and constituent engagement strategies and education advancement. We are live today, as you probably noticed, so say hello in the comments section on LinkedIn. We'd love to have your questions, so if we can't answer them on the live show, we'll try to do that in the bonus segment. If you're listening to us by podcast, we appreciate you adding us to your feed, and we are grateful for the teams at Protopia, AlumnIQ, Givzey, and Richmond Associates for being our presenting sponsors for Season 4. Chris, getting our conversation started today about traditions, one of the most interesting topics in our space, and one of the more challenging ones, I think, to navigate is traditions, because they're so important, and yet sometimes they can stand in the way of forward progress. Innovating around traditions is a difficult endeavor, but let's just start with, what's the best tradition that you're aware of out there? Any come to mind?
I thought of several examples, but my favorite, there's a lot of bias in this one. My favorite, though, is at my own alma mater, and I got to preside over this event for 7 years when I was in the alumni role. So Lehigh does a first-year student, used to be called freshman, alumni rally, and it's during orientation weekend. Students arrive on a Friday, and then on Saturday night, there's an event where all the first-year 1,100 kids get together, and we have an adoption ceremony where the class that is 50 years the senior to the incoming class, so the class of 2020 was adopted by the class of 1970, for example, so on. 26 and 76 class, so they're graduating right now. So there's this moment where we get them on the lawn at the main building. We teach them the fight songs in the alma mater. There's a couple speeches. My role, back when I was in the role, I used to give a speech as well about the importance of being part of the Lehigh family and the legacy. So it's really a moment where you sort of instill and plant that seed for the first time that it's not just 4 years, it's forever. There's a parade of classes, and we have flags for each class year. So it's kind of a cool thing. Even the undergrads who go through it are sort of don't know any better. because they're forced to go as first-year students. They don't know that it's not required, but they show up. But even they afterwards will say it was really kind of a inspiring, warm welcome to 80,000 or 90,000 alumni population that they're part of. And I think it's just a really cool event. It's my favorite one. How about you? Do you have one, Brian?
Well, I was going to say there's some great alumni events that I would classify as traditions, and we're going to talk with Carolyn Kimberlin from Dartmouth. But I grew up going to Dartmouth traditions, and in the fall over homecoming, they have one of my favorites, which is their annual bonfire. Light this huge bonfire in the middle of the green at Dartmouth, and then all the freshmen run around the bonfire the number of times that it was that class year, and it was a rowdy tradition for the ages. But, there's some other traditions that are more like symbols or like experiences. At Longwood University, Joan of Arc is this sort of patron saint of the institution. And there's statues of Joan of Arc in a few different places. And there's one particular Joni on the pony, where it's in the main rotunda, and it's a tradition as the students are graduating or just afterwards to kind of touch this particular spot on the Joni. And, there's little symbols and there's big events, and every school's got them, to a degree. And if they don't have them, they're trying to create those shared traditions. But
exactly.
Are there circumstances by which traditions are good, and when do they become a hindrance?
Yeah, the tradition is something that connects a community over multiple generations, the way I think of it. So that story I told you about Lehigh, the class of 1976 that adopted the class of 26 4 years ago when they arrived as freshmen, the class of 1976 was adopted by the class of 1926. And pretty soon there's going to be, 200 years of history in here. So those things connect over multiple generations, which I really like, and it's good. It promotes belonging to the community, and those are the good traditions. You want to maintain those and keep those going, maybe adapt them slightly, but but the bad traditions are the ones that you don't want to promote anymore, and then trying to stop them. And there's a group or population of alums who feel strongly about it, and when you go to stop the tradition or make a change to it, you're going to have somebody who's telling you why they shouldn't and why you shouldn't do it and why it's so important to the culture of the place. So I think if we're going to promote healthy, longstanding membership, a shared experience across generations of community, it's a good tradition. Keep doing it. But if it's divisive in any way or, outdated in some other way, there's lots of politically correct language you can put around this. But I think those are the ones that need to be examined and rethought and perhaps stopped or tweaked altogether.
Well, let's bring Carolyn Gray Kimberlin from Dartmouth out, and we're going to talk some more about it. Hey, Carolyn, how are you?
Good. How are you, Ryan? Hi, Chris. Good to see you both.
Good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, happy to do it.
We're so glad to have you on the show. Carolyn Gray Kimberlin is Vice President for Alumni Relations at Dartmouth College. As I was mentioning in the wind-up there, Carolyn, Dartmouth has got a lot of traditions. It is a tradition-rich institution. But let's hear you describe it a little bit. How would you describe traditions as part of the culture at Dartmouth?
Tradition is really important within Dartmouth. There are traditions within traditions, I would say, is part of our culture. We're a 257-year-old institution, founded in the 1769. So a long, long history. I was hearing you talk about homecoming, and I had to look it up because I was trying to remember the exact date. Our initial homecoming was in 1888. So some of our traditions date back even longer than some institutions have been around. And it's really an important part of what helps build the fabric of Dartmouth. I think a lot of students who come here understand that they are coming into a family, even from the admissions tour part of their experience. They see it's something different. There are alumni engaged in their interviews, alumni engaged as soon as they arrive on campus, and all the way through. So that tradition is steeped and well baked into the fabric of what is Dartmouth. And it's really what makes it kind of unique and special to be part of the Dartmouth family.
What would you say, and you mentioned, I think, alluded to it a little bit, which is that, being a school what has really old and cherished traditions is in of itself unique. But what would you say is different about leading engagement at a school where traditions are much older? And Dartmouth itself is a 250-year-old school.
Yeah, changing them is really difficult. So I heard you talk a little bit about, sometimes there are traditions that are harmful or no longer politically correct. And We need to adapt and change, and that's not always easy. And so sometimes they're just dangerous. Homecoming is a great example. You talked about the students
Bonfire,
running
yeah.
around
Yeah.
running around the bonfire. So that is no longer exactly how it's done. The class, so this incoming class this fall will be the 2030s, and the 1980s will have torches that they hand off to the students. They will do one lap around and they will light the bonfire. So there's a symbolic passing of the torch to the incoming class or the first year class. You know, back in your days in Hanover, it used to be a run around 26 or 27 times, however many class years you were. There was no fire gate. There was a touch the fire moment that
There was.
the students, many alumni still proudly bear those scars of physically touching the fire. So we've modernized some of that. We have put up some safety gates so that the fire is a little more contained. And I know we're going to talk about, changing and innovating, but sometimes the weather also competes with us. So we have to adapt, and we can chat about that in a minute.
That bonfire was so rowdy back in the day. And of course, I grew up in the 90s. So the students were running around it like 90 sometimes. And you could definitely, as a community member, like run up and touch the bonfire. And we did that. And so did the students. It was definitely ripe for some safety precautions added.
Yeah. And for anyone who's just imagining that we've built this small little, fire in the middle
This
of
is a pyre.
campus,
You're talking about
this is a
pyre.
multi-story, now thankfully engineered by the Thayer engineering students and put together, but the classes would build it. There's a precise height that they have on it now, but it's something like 70 or 80 feet in the air that this large structure goes up. But the students now still top it. They put their class year on the top. They have still a part of building the structure and being a part of it. They sign the planks, they sign their boards. So and a lot of alumni come back. We have a parade that leads into the homecoming bonfire, part of Dartmouth night. And so there's a lot of engagement both with the students and the alumni who come back to celebrate this really historic tradition.
Sounds like a fun night, though. I mean, it sounds like it would be a lot of fun.
It's one of my favorite nights at Dartmouth, I won't lie.
The building of the bonfire, there was I think it was Texas A&M not long ago, several, maybe 20 years ago, had that same exact scenario where students would build the fire and they collapsed and some students were killed during it, which changed their tradition quickly, of course. I had another one of Lehigh, what used to be that you would rush the field at the end of the Lehigh Lafayette football game and tear down the goalposts, which were made wooden H-shaped goalposts back like the replicate the old days. And there would be fights over who could get pieces of the goalpost back to their fraternity house. Typically, it was men doing stupid stuff, of course. And they would fight over it. And they stopped it. While I was working at Lehigh, they said, we're no longer doing this. We had cops. They had, they stopped people from rushing the field. And over, 20 plus years later, no one even thinks about it unless usually it's people like me saying, back when I was in school, we would rush the field and we'd have to change it. The tradition you guys had that's really have in many schools still to do this is the adding of the class year after your name. You do it on invites or on name tags, etc. And Carolyn, I remember you told me the story about the fact that you're not a Dartmouth alum and that you didn't have a class year after your name. I felt the same thing for the 5 years that was at Cornell. I never had the numbers after my name, but then you were adopted by one of the classes. Tell that story real quick. I think that was kind of cool.
Yeah, so I'm a proudly adopted member of the class of 75. It's a tradition it's great honor to be bestowed. It's a very high honor.
Yeah.
So I was the second person to be adopted by the class of 75 in their 50-year history. I worked with the class on their 50th reunion leading into that, help them prepare, get ready for a historic milestone for them. And it's a way to honor somebody who's had a significant impact on the class and to bring them into the Dartmouth family. It's just, honestly, when they told me, I teared up. I wasn't expecting it. And it's just such a lovely honor. And so my class year reads 75A. There's a small A following it, and I am asked to pay dues. I'm invited to all the events. They jumped right into asking me to pay dues 2 weeks later, so no grass grows underneath their feet there. But it was a tremendous honor, and I think it's a really nice way to engage folks who were meaningful to the class. So there have been spouses adopted who, if the classmate passed away, or if they just, a lot of times the wives from our classes before we went co-ed were folks who really did a lot of the planning for
Plan
some
the
of the
reunions.
husbands
Yeah,
on
Dean Leon.
reunion.
Same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so they were often adopted. Various deans. Our President Bylock, was adopted by the class of 76. She's the first woman of Dartmouth to serve in the role as president, and 1976 was the first class to fully admit women through all 4 years. So it was nice. They were very eager to adopt her. And class year is really important to Dartmouth alumni. It's important to a lot of alumni, but we actually don't refer to our admissions team, and our on-campus partners don't refer to students as first year, sophomores, juniors, seniors. You are always referred to as your class year. So my nephew, who was just here looking and considering, and I'm hopeful will be applying, if he were to come to Dartmouth, he would be a 2031. And he would always be referred to as a 2031. And that is just baked in from the day you arrive. So a lot of people will ask, what do you do to build this sense of class and tradition? And a lot of it is mechanisms that were set up before I was even born. And they were, they're just part of the fabric and the DNA of what makes Dartmouth unique.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we did at Lehigh last year was the same thing, is that we convinced our tech team, institutional technology team, to add the class year into their email address. So instead of being CVM 0, it would have been CVM 88, my class year. And then the class year was built into your email address. A really good reminder that we're going to be part of that forever. So I want to make sure we get to the question where you gave us 4 or 5 good examples, but were there any ones on your list you wanted to make sure you shared with us of other examples at Dartmouth that?
Honestly, we hit on most of them. There are so many.
Good.
It would take probably the whole hour if I listed all of Dartmouth traditions. I hit on some of my favorites, though.
Well, let's take a quick break with a word from our sponsor, Protopia, and we will be right back.
Amy loved her college years. Varsity basketball, student leadership, lifelong friendships. But life got busy, and over time, she drifted away from her alma mater. Then, an email changed everything. A student, just like she once was, needed advice. It wasn't a donation ask. It wasn't a long-term commitment. Just a chance to help. Amy answered, suggesting a call. It took minutes, but for Jacqueline, it meant everything. A real connection. The advancement team saw Amy was engaged. They reached out, not for a gift, but to thank her, to invite her back into the community. Amy realized how much she missed being part of this world. She joined a panel. She met students. She felt the impact she could have. And when the time came, giving back wasn't a question. It felt like the next step. This is the power of Protopia. Not another alumni engagement platform. Not another fundraising tool. A smarter way to engage alumni where they are, creating real connections that lead to real impact. See the ripple effect in action. Visit protopia.co today.
All right. So, Carolyn, picking up the thread where we left off, I mean, modernizing engagement without making alumni feel like the institution is abandoning its identity is particularly of concern, right? As you're attempting to move traditions into a modern era. But how do you think about that? How do you make sure that alumni are along for the ride without sort of making them feel like the school is changing too much?
Yeah, I look at it as additive to what we're doing. So much of the Dartmouth ecosystem is bringing people together in person. Our alumni love to come together in person and back to campus in Hanover, and that will never change. But how do we bring Dartmouth to them more readily? And I think, I'm not sure that without COVID, we would have advanced as far as we have in the last few years, because it really forced an institution like ours that could always rely on in-person gathering to think about it differently. Change doesn't happen easily. We are much more of a battleship that moves slowly with the current, and we don't always shift swiftly in that moment. But I think where we were able to bring faculty members on Zoom to classes and clubs, to have various events, to bring folks together in ways that we hadn't been able to before, has been really innovative. And we're thinking about our in-person training. We had canceled that during COVID, obviously. We haven't quite brought it back. We've been doing a lot of that training. We call it VOX. It's volunteer officer experience. And how do we augment what we've done really well and what our alumni value as volunteers, which is the in-person connection. I often call it the elevator conversations where, they heard Chris say something and they want to take a few minutes in the elevator and say, hey, tell me a little bit more about that. That can only happen in person. And those conversations are extremely valuable. But what do we do to enhance that? What can we do to add to what's already happening and bring more to the table? So can we have other conversations or smaller conversations via Zoom, do some of that training and build some of that engagement along the way? So I look at it as enhancing and adding to what we've already done versus replacing what has worked so well for us for 200 plus years.
You gave a good example there of changing a longstanding thing and forced by circumstances beyond our control, COVID, right? Everybody did. And a lot of people pivoted right back to the old model. Kudos to you for maintaining some level of, a digital but still in person is going to be, I get it. Your community likes that. But other examples you can think of where you've had to take a long-standing tradition and sort of modernize it in order to reflect the values of the alumni community today. Anything else come to mind?
One that I was sort of forced into, I will talk about, is actually homecoming. So Chris, in the windup, you were talking about, drought and you're needing the rain. Last year, New Hampshire was in a severe drought status.
Wow.
And even Dartmouth, with its, 140-year tradition of bonfire, were not exempt from being able to put on a large-scale bonfire in the middle of our campus.
Digital bonfire was had, is that what you're going to tell us?
Yeah. So
A digital bonfire.
I think there had been 2 other times. So COVID was one. And then I think there was a time during World War II that the bonfire had been canceled. But otherwise, it had gone on every year as planned forever. So we had to figure out, what do we do if we can't light this giant structure? And I have a fabulous conference and events team. They came up with a couple of really, I thought, innovative ideas. And we did a light show where we normally would have had the bonfire. We still had all of our parade, our tradition, the walking, the symbolic handing off of a torch from the 29th, the 79th, the 29th, but we had a light show instead. And it was interesting. The alumni, I think, they're certainly disappointed. We were all disappointed. We want this bonfire. We're bringing it back this year. Drought hopeful. But the students were engaged in a different way. We brought in some DJs. We had some student DJs. We changed it up every, I think, 15, 20 minutes or so. And it was a really different experience for them. And they loved it. They don't, they're younger students. They don't necessarily have the steeped in 50, 60-year tradition. But it was trying to figure out, how do we take something we've done forever, keep the spirit of it, the community building, the engagement with students and alumni, and deal with the scenario that we had. So I thought it was the best of what we could have come up with. And it's our great backup plan now if we are still in drought status, which is also important to have.
If you're thinking just more in broad terms, Carolyn, about leading change at Dartmouth, how do you think about that in general, maybe beyond just traditions and innovating in our particular space at a school with such rich tradition?
So I took over about 6 months ago after, longtime vice president had retired. We had been starting a restructure as part of her winding down and my taking over already. But we were really able to take a step back from the work. And instead of thinking about, where do people fit within the organization and what can they do well, really, say, what is needed? What does our alumni base need? What do our volunteers need? What does the work demand? And how do we think about that structure versus saying, here are the people I have, let me just plug them into various holes that I have. It meant an entirely new way of thinking about how we do alumni relations at Dartmouth. Some people had jobs they've never even experienced before. I had people who'd worked solely on alumni admissions, now working on programs like reunion and homecoming and volunteer management. We had a few people who decided they wanted to do something different, and that was okay. They all launched into really great places. But for the most part, the people were able to come in and expand what they've been doing in the past. And throughout that process, one of the things I said was, there's no real playbook for this. We are making this up. We're creating this as we go. I want all of my team to be a part of this as we go. I don't have all the answers. Right. I can make decisions and I'm happy to, but I really empowered my team to say, let's work on this together. And when things are not, if we don't have an answer, let's figure it out. Let's really think, let's sit down and figure out, we didn't think of that. We didn't know that that was going to come up. And so I think it's really led to an innovative system. We're much more entrepreneurial. We're much more nimble and able to adapt to change. And there's no constant in this work like change, it seems. But I think we're a better and stronger team as a result. And if I look at, we track some of our metrics on just happiness and engagement, et cetera. My team in our last measurement was really, measuring really strongly in how they were feeling about the work, how they're feeling about their role in the work, and really excited about where we're headed. So just trying to say, at an institution that's 250 years old, do we always have to do things the same way? It was important to take that time to take a step back and say, what is it really that we need to accomplish? And let's not leave any assumptions on the table about how we've traditionally done the work. What can we do to really improve our experience for our alumni and our volunteers?
I've watched you do the change management work with your team, and I'm going to tease something we're going to talk about in the second half, but change management when it comes to volunteers who are used to doing things a certain way is a little harder. What's the number of separate 501c3 organizations that exist? Is it 167?
It's probably 100. I think it's 157. So yeah,
150. So 160-ish separate 50. We're not going to talk about that now. All I'm going to do is leave it there so that you come back and listen to the podcast. So those that are listening to us live, because it's a really
incomprehensible a number of.
It totally is.
I think when I sit in a conference, and I won't go into it, but if anyone says how many 501c3s, there's a handful of zeros. There's a majority one.
Right.
And sometimes there's 2 or 3. My 160-ish is never on the docket.
I'm going to raise you 165 more. Unbelievable. So come tune into the second half if you want to hear more about that. But that gets into the notion of how do you, that stakeholder group is a group of volunteers, and managing change with that population is very different. The other group would be your colleagues in advancement. When you start to function differently, they need to react and collaborate with you in a different way as well. So it's been interesting to watch you do it, because you're a very good communicator. You're a good collaborator. I use the saying when we do strategic planning, involve them in planning the battle and they won't battle the plan. You're good at that. You're good at bringing people in to do the work, help you figure out what the next step is. Do you use that same approach with volunteers, for example, or other colleagues in advancement outside of your team? How do you help shape the change with that other stakeholders?
With the volunteers, I find, particularly because we are such a place steeped in tradition, that bringing them along in the planning is really important. So 2 current examples, one that's just wrapped up and one that started. We have the Vox weekend that I mentioned. We hadn't had it in person in a while. And my team could have just said, here's what the next weekend is going to be. And there would have been an uproar about, I didn't do this, or this is what I liked about the last one, or some piece of it, because it was just done a bit in a vacuum with just my team. So instead, we created a working group, brought together a chair who was a member of the Alumni Council. He's a great volunteer. We went out, made sure, I think the team was a little under 20 volunteers, but cross-representation from classes, clubs, organizations, regions, all the different factors that play into who's going to come to a weekend and what decisions are they going to make, if it's too far, if it's too short, if it's not enough. And they spent probably 9 months or so coming up with surveying, reaching out to volunteers, engaging volunteers, getting feedback, getting input, and came up with a plan that was close-ish, I would say, to what I might have conceived, but had some nuances that I wasn't thinking of. And that's because they did the research and really dove in. And those pieces, I think, are really important to get the buy-in from volunteers, that we listened, we learned, we heard what was important. And I think we just rolled it out last week, saying when it was going to be coming back and what they could expect. And I don't want to say I heard nothing, but I just heard great. So excited to hear. I didn't get the wave of potential negativism that I might have heard if, I just said, here's what the weekend is. Because everybody had a chance to provide input, to provide their ideas. So we change is not always our strong suit. I'll tell a quick joke, but my favorite joke that's been told to me now by multiple alumni, so I take no credit for it, but it's, how many alumni does it take to change a light bulb at Dartmouth? And the answer is at least 5, because it takes 1 to change it and 4 at least to tell you how much better the old one was. And that is not my job. That is the alumni of themselves, but they know this
Right.
about themselves. And so it's
Yeah,
leaning
yeah.
into, how do they know what is in their DNA and how do we work with them and it's not an against, it's always a with, and how do we bring them along as part of the journey and share the reality. So some of the realities where budget was lower than it had been in the past. So what did that mean?
Right.
And what was it going to mean for the experience? And so explaining that to them versus just saying, we don't have the budget was a
What's
much
the other
better
one
product
that's
for us.
underway or getting started? You said you had 2.
The next one is we are going to think about the committees of our alumni council currently exist align well with our old structure and not necessarily with the work that we're doing right now. So again, we've put together a working committee, executive committee members of the Alumni Council, and they're going to do, I think, a deeper dive into what is working. I never want to make work for a committee, and there's a couple that I feel like we are making work to keep them productive, and they don't like it either. They're not complaining, but they're saying, is this really helping you? And it's hard to say with a straight face that it is when I'm creating work for them. They want to roll up their sleeves and dive in, and I love that. And I want them to do meaningful, engaging work.
A couple of signatures of both examples real quick. I know we got to wrap, Ryan, but involving them in the process, clear and that transparently involving them in all the pieces, over communicating, probably the right word there, listening to their feedback. But the other one that's key there is that you're involving them early in the process. You're not going down the river and then when you get to the rapids, trying to tell them what we're going to do with their involvement. You're telling them early on so you can navigate that whole process down to the end, which I think is really smart. Yeah. Kudos.
And I think that's knowing, at other institutions, I may not have to do that, but this is knowing my alumni and what they're going to react to and what they're going to be passionate about. So I think knowing your institution and knowing what those trigger points are is really important.
But those ingredients that you're using would be good advice for anyone to take under when they're making a change, to involve people early in the process, communicate, train, all those things I think you do really well, no matter where they are.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Carolyn. We are going to be back with our bonus edition of the podcast. And for those of you who are watching the show on LinkedIn or YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you can hear the second half of our conversation with Carolyn and all of our special guests. Coming up on the next show, we've got Lindsay Valdine from Northwestern University on June the 5th. And thank you so much. We'll be right back after this break.
Thanks, Carolyn. Well done.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Chris.